welcome back. It's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, right after this. You know, as a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Simply go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's bring them on. Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
Well, let's begin here today. DHS postpones Real ID compliance to 2023. Not really a shocker, right? I mean, this is related to the pandemic.
It is, though, perhaps pushing it 19 months into May of 2023. It was maybe a little bit of a surprise. The original deadline for everybody for compliance with Real ID was 2008. So this will take us 15 years past that deadline. So that's a pretty big issue there. Real ID, of course, comes from the 9/11 Commission, which found these folks, some of the terrorists, were using driver's licenses that they had obtained that lasted, even though they were no longer in the country legally, they were using driver's licenses that they had obtained and were still good. And the 9/11 Commission said, hey, if people aren't here legally, they shouldn't be able to get driver's licenses. They can get them on airplanes. So this is, it's a pretty significant security flaw there. And the longer we go, the longer that flaw exists. So there is a reason for some urgency there. But as you said, during the pandemic, a lot of DMVs were shut down. And the estimates are that fewer than 50% of the public has a Real ID compliant license right now. If they had gone ahead and left the October deadline in place, October of this year, it would have been a real crush. So you understand some delay. The 19 months was a surprise to some people.
Yeah. Biden picked to head up ICE, froze out federal agency as a county sheriff. Ed Gonzalez, besides knowing that he wasn't a big fan of Donald Trump, what else do we know about him?
He was actively against Texas law that cracked down on sanctuary cities. It's an interesting position. So he was the sheriff in Harris County, which surrounds Houston. So it's, I think, maybe the third or fourth largest jurisdiction population-wise, and a very immigrant-heavy population. He did cooperate to some extent with ICE. If ICE asked for somebody to be held and turned over, he would do that. Now, of course, he had to do that once the Texas law came into effect. But what he did do is that as soon as he became sheriff in 2017, he canceled, and you and I have talked about these in the past, they're known as 287G agreement. And that's where the ICE basically works with local authorities as a force multiplier. They train deputies in prison and jail to begin the process. They can flag people, they have access to ICE systems, and they can begin the deportation process. So where an ICE officer can maybe go through a few people a day out of a particular prison or jail, when you have the deputies there, first of all, they're working 24 hours a day in those jails, so they can catch people who are booked in at night before they would be released at 6 a.m. or whatever. So it's a real force multiplier. He said that it was not a good use of his money. It's an interesting position to pick a guy who was actively not a fan of ICE's full panoply of activities. I would draw an equivalent to say, Donald Trump was derided for Betsy DeVos, for example, a big fan of school choice, of private schools and charter schools and whatnot, to pick her for the education secretary. This would perhaps be a good comparison. Somebody who actively fought against the agency that he is now being put in, or has been tasked to be put in charge of. So a really interesting choice. The other thing about it, we now know the nominees for all three of the immigration agencies: ICE, USCIS, which is the legal immigration agency, and then Customs and Border Protection, which is the border agency. The USCIS nominee was previously worked in that agency. But the two law enforcement agencies, ICE and CBP, Biden has picked police chiefs or sheriffs, so local law enforcement folks who have no federal experience in those agencies. And there's perhaps a reason for that. Anybody who came up through the ranks of those agencies is going to support those agencies perhaps more than these local law enforcement folks who have been critics of the agencies.
Yeah. According to DHS, courthouses now off limits for arresting illegal immigrants. Why? If these people are breaking the law, they're breaking the law. Why not arrest them there or, for that matter, anywhere?
Well, so DHS has long had what's known as a sensitive policy, a sensitive location policy. So they do not want to arrest people at hospitals. They don't want to arrest people, and they don't arrest people at churches, and they don't arrest outside of schools. And the reasons given are, hey, we want people to seek emergency medical care. We don't want people to not seek medical care because they're afraid of getting nabbed by ICE. We don't want to arrest people in front of schools and churches. We don't want to infringe on that for First Amendment rights. So those have always been sensitive locations that for more than a decade have been off limits for ICE arrest. The change here is that even under the Obama administration, courthouses were considered fair game, and not just fair game, but actually good locations for everybody involved. Because when you go into a courthouse, you've gone through a metal detector, and you are presumably free of weapons. And so it's somewhat similar to actually arresting somebody as they're being released from a prisoner jail, which is where ICE likes to do this, because you know that it's going to be a safer encounter. If you're going out into the community, you just don't know what you're going to get. So ICE, as they've been pushed out of all of these prisons and jails by sanctuary policies, they've increasingly gone to courthouses because you know that the person is going to be there because they have a case at that time. You know the person's going to be there, and you know that the actual arrest is likely to be safer than out in the community. The Biden administration didn't have a very good answer or a very good reason for the new policy, but we know that immigrant rights activists have been clamoring for this for years. There are some folks, some local prosecutors who argue that, hey, witnesses aren't showing up for our cases because they're afraid of being arrested by ICE. I've actually never seen. I've gone through the data that the state of New York, offered to back that statement up, and it just isn't. That data does not back up that claim. But it's one of these things where it's a very emotional issue, and maybe the facts aren't as important as the emotions on this issue for all involved. But it is a major change. Very particular note is that this came from on high. The Homeland Security Secretary, Mayorkas, ordered ICE, and interestingly enough, CBP is now roped in. They never had a policy at all on this, and CBP, Border Patrol agents, can't make arrests at or near courthouses as well. Mayorkas, who ordered these changes, was the deputy secretary during the Obama years when they were allowed to make courthouse arrests. And I asked Homeland Security what changed, and they didn't respond to that. But in his statement he issued, he suggested that, things got bad under the Trump administration, but rather than go back to the Obama policy, he's gone even more restrictive. So very interesting.
Yeah. All right, another one of your stories. We will take everything. DHS to revoke visas and freeze assets on smugglers. Wow, DHS acting tough after the weakness in the previous story. Sort of a mixed message from them sometimes.
Sure. Now, the one thing, there are very few areas where you'll find sort of unanimous agreement on any part of immigration. One area where you will is on going after smugglers. Both Democrats, Republicans, security advocates, and immigrant rights advocates all realize that the smugglers are abusing the migrants. So you and I have talked about some of the really awful parts of this with the teenage girls who go and get on birth control before they make this journey because the risk of rape is so high. And we've talked about the other abuses along the way, the rapes, the robberies, just the reckless driving, the car accidents where people will get smashed up and thrown out of vehicles and killed because as they're being smuggled through. Those are all the product of smugglers who treat these people as commodities. Basically like an Amazon driver with a bunch of boxes in the back of his truck. That's how the smugglers treat these folks. Is they're each a package to be delivered to a particular area, and sometimes if the package is slowing down the rest of their getting to the location, they'll ditch the package. And what that means is they'll leave the person in the desert. They'll throw the person into the Rio Grande and to distract Border Patrol agents while they take the rest of their load somewhere. So the smugglers are bad, bad, bad people. And so the administration has said, hey, we're going to go after you. I'm going to be fascinated to see just how much this develops. We've seen these sorts of promises from past administrations before, making low-level criminal cases against the people that they arrest doing the driving and whatnot. You and I have talked about some of those cases. one of the interesting things is that how many times they actually don't pursue charges. I've got dozens and dozens and dozens, probably more hundreds of cases in my files where somebody was driving illegal immigrants through a checkpoint and they weren't prosecuted, and then they were caught a second or a third time and finally prosecuted on that, the second or third time, but not on the first time. There actually somebody, I have a case in my files right now of a woman who showed up just a week ago at a checkpoint, was arrested. She actually brought $1,000 with her that she said she was going to use to bond herself out, just like she did the previous time she was caught. And she said, "You all know you're just going to leave me and let me go anyway. Why don't we just hurry this up?" That's what she told the agent. So certain she was that she wasn't going to be prosecuted or held. So, if you want to get tough on these folks, there are ways beyond just freezing assets that may do that and may dry up that supply of people who are doing the smuggling. They did not announce that, and that's what I'll be interested to see is how much teeth they're actually willing to put behind it.
All right, one more story before I let you run. A top Republican says migrant surge shows Border Patrol is critically understaffed. How many short are they?
It's a really good question. In terms of the actual straight numbers, the Border Patrol is funded for about 22,000 agents, and they have fewer than 20,000 agents. They actually, for years and years and years, were losing more agents every year to retirement and resignations and transfers than they were actually training and adding to their force. So there was a point at which the Border Patrol had more than 20,000 agents, and attrition kept cutting them down. So they should have at least 2,000 more agents than they already do. What the congressman was saying is, from what he's seen, even that's not enough. The amount of overtime that they're working and the gaps that have been left in the line based on them having to do the babysitting duties for the families and the children that come across, there are massive gaps in the line. The Trump administration had a plan to hire 5,000 more Border Patrol agents and kept submitting it to Congress. And every year Congress would just say, no, thank you. Part of the reason is because there were already the 2,000 slots funded that they couldn't actually fill. But there's long been a belief that by most people, there are certainly some dissenting voices, but long been a belief by most people that the Border Patrol needs more agents in order to man a 2,000-mile border. One interesting aspect here, in the 2013 immigration bill that came through the Senate, didn't get action in the House, but was backed by the Obama administration, so by Vice President Biden. They actually called for hiring, I believe it was 20,000 additional Border Patrol agents. They would have doubled the force from 20,000 to 40,000. So, at one point, there was this very widespread agreement that we needed twice the number of Border Patrol agents we had right now. Instead, we've actually gone the other way and sliced a couple of hundred or thousand off of the numbers that we used to have.
All right, folks, you can check out all of Stephen Dinan's stories at WashingtonTimes.com. Stephen, thank you. We'll do it again.
My pleasure, Andy.
Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. Again, go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.